As Chris begins to act very recklessly due to his mental state, a decision is made regarding John, and we finally get a bit of information about Nadia that helps clue us into her past. For the first topic, it's pretty much just about Garrett's attempt to get back onto the Cortez case. For whatever reason, Maya decides to confront Garrett about all of his stalking, and with him seeing her with this black eye, her looking very scared, he gets triggered a bit because his mom was abused, and it pushes him to want to really do things right this time. He wants to get her in witness protection. He wants to set things up so that she can possibly get out. But the problem is that Maya is so scared about what could happen that because Garrett's track record is not that good, she's not really willing to rely on him again as she did before. Plus, lest we forget, Terry, who is now controlling this case, he also knows of Garrett's track record, and he isn't really willing to put his name on the line for Garrett. Now, because of Garrett getting Tony to clone Maya's phone, he does have some information that he can dangle in front of Terry. And of course, Terry, even if he wants to do things by the books, of course, he still wants results, so he kind of has torn feelings about this whole thing. For the second topic, we're focusing on Chris, who really is struggling at this point. He almost decides to ride his bike into a truck. He punches a glass mirror at school, which, leads to a vandalism claim, and because he still is in TNT, aka undocumented, this freaks out Fiona a bit because he's drawing attention to himself. But what can she do and what can Chris do? Chris has no one to talk to about the fact that he murdered his uncle. He has no one to talk to about being undocumented because of how fearful that situation is. So he's pretty much stuck with his emotions with no one to go to because honestly his mom and aunt don't have the time. His only other options would be his sister, who the show doesn't really focus on that much, and Luca is too young to talk to about this, so you can see that increasingly he's imploding at a time when the last thing Fiona or even Tony needs is this type of distraction or another thing to worry about. Especially since John has now become a notable problem because, yes, Fiona knocked him out, and Tony even gave him a sedative to kind of buy them more time to figure out what to do, but they can't take turns keeping him alive in this bathtub forever while, he has a whole business that's going to be questioning what happened to him. Never mind, they don't have the time to take care of this man. So with that in mind, Tony's like, let's just call Armand to handle it, but because Armand's not family, even though he has done so much for their family, Fiona's against it. The last topic focuses on what is not only Nadia's background, but also a little bit about Robert as well. So, as established, 1.6 million thereabouts is how much that Nadia and Armand owe. They cannot pay that outright because the gun business is pretty much dead, and in terms of Tony's business, because she refuses to deal in more addictive narcotics and drugs, it gives them a lifeline, but it's not paying the type of money that Nadia knows that they could get from something that's a bit more potent. So the idea became that they're going to renegotiate their deal, and with that in mind, Armand decides when it comes to dealing with Robert, Kemdar, whatever, he'll be the enforcer that collects the money. And unfortunately for him, Armand has to accept that Robert wants to be closer to Nadia since that's his ex officially, and he wants her to be working at his gambling den called Fastlane, working the players as she did when he met her when she was working at some bar or whatever in a slum in Argentina. And that, from what we're told, is Nadia's origin story. She was some woman working at some type of gambling den. For whatever reason, Robert came in there, saw her hustling, saw she was good at it. One thing led to another, and somehow they went from possibly dating down there to him bringing her up to the States. And that's it. Unfortunately, we still don't fully get whether or not Nadia is in the States legally, whether or not she got married to Robert and got a green card, how she met Armand, and that whole situation. But we do get the most basics that she's really into gambling. She likes fast cars, she likes soccer, aka football, whichever way you prefer it. And little by little, they're trying to build up her character. And even when it comes to Robert, they reveal, he's a loan shark, has this whole huge gambling empire. And we also learn from Armand that he's funding a large amount of the gangs in Las Vegas. But even with all that information, it still kind of feels like it's not enough, but we can talk about that later. The main thing that you need to know when it comes to this is that Armand working for Robert is not something he's comfortable with. He's not comfortable with Nadia getting too close to Robert, and she kind of finds that rich because of how much he does for Tony. Such as, while he's supposed to be getting Robert's money, instead he's helping Tony deal with the John situation, which of course is upsetting to her, and also it kind of pushes her more toward Robert because at this point Nadia's trying to assert her independence and her individuality, for lack of a better term, in terms of not only establishing with Robert that she and Armand aren't his employees, but also at the same time that Armand is not her boss, as in Nadia's boss, so she can do as she pleases, which means her drinking with Robert as he helps Tony deal with the John situation in terms of killing John, dealing with the body, and in terms of how Fiona feels about it. As the episode's title notes and translate to whatever happens, that's how she feels. She doesn't want to make a decision. She doesn't want to be involved. But if the situation gets handled, fine. She just wants one less thing to worry about in her life. In terms of our review, we only have highlights for this episode, and the first one is just more background on Nadia. Little by little, we're learning more and more about her. In this episode, we learn she's from a slum in Argentina, where she apparently made a living making bets, or else conning people into making bad bets. And yes, there's still information that we need to know in terms of how she got to America, whether she played Robert or else they were in love at the time, because he does refer to her as his ex. But, part of the mystique when it comes to Nadia is not knowing everything, yet at the same time, because she's so mysterious and, I don't want to call her a femme fatale type, but she kind of leans into that a little bit, so it's the double-edged sword. You want to know more, but there's also this fear that the more you know, the less of mystique she may have. But all things considered, so far they haven't really messed her up, except when they kind of dialed her back or kind of put her under Armand's shadow. So with her getting to step into the light, maybe it's time to step back and just trust the process. Alongside that highlight of getting to know more about Nadia, there's also the highlight of getting to know more about Robert. In the last episode review, we kind of noted that for the most part, Robert doesn't bring anything for himself. It's basically building up other characters. But at least in this episode, with it being established by Armand that he, being Robert, is a loan shark, that Robert is apparently funding many of the gangs in Las Vegas, and he has a gambling empire, we're getting not enough to make him an interesting villain. But at least there's the foundation being slowly laid down so that he can become something. Now, this is a 10-episode season from what I'm seeing, so him getting to that point in the halfway mark seems like a little bit late, but who knows? There could be long-term plans for him beyond this season, which could allow him to build up more. But it's really hard to say because right now everything feels very short-term with this season. You can't really see the long-term potential of what could happen in season 3, 4, or 5. So, living on a prayer here. The last highlight for me is just Chris. When it comes to Sean Liu and what he's bringing to Chris this season thus far, I would submit that he's kind of blowing everybody else out the water. Yes, Fiona has definitely gone through some things that have shown that her actress can definitely perform and bring something new to the character, and there's still things to explore when it comes to Fiona, but being that Chris was kind of not that notable in season one because he was just Fiona's kid, but now he's having to deal with being a TNT. He's dealing with the fact that he murdered his uncle and the fact that he has no one to talk to about any of this because it seems like he doesn't even have any friends. Watching him implode and eventually that's going to lead to an explode is something that's definitely a sight to see. And I'm still interested to know down the line, how is he going to handle this? Is there a chance that he may get involved with Maya Cortez and maybe get into drugs? Is there a chance that he may find an outlet, either a positive one where maybe he's helping Tony with the clinic, or maybe something negative where he gets into the local gang life? It's hard to say, and if I was to be fair, because I think I'm being very optimistic and like giddy about what could happen with Chris, I feel like they need to strike while the iron's hot because it's gonna come a point within 2 to 3 episodes where it's gonna be sort of like how we mentioned before, where you don't know what the long-term potential is. Short term, this seems like a really good storyline for the actor and the character, but whether or not they can keep that up is definitely something I'm gonna question because it doesn't feel like they're striking while the iron is hot. They're still trying to like let things simmer and boil over, but after a certain point, we're going to realize there's nothing cooking in the pot. It's just a bunch of steam. Overall, when it comes to the cleaning lady, we're at that point where it's kind of like we're about halfway through the season. I need to see long-term potential realized, not just a lot of short-term gains. With Fiona, we've seen it in terms of her standing up to John, and Tony, we've seen it in terms of her getting into business with Armand, and even allowing Fiona to see what she is like around Armand. Chris has exponentially been developed to the point where you're now taking note of him, and he's not just Fiona's son. And while, yes, Garrett remains this blight on the show, at the same time, Robert is a new character who could become something. Nadia's slow but steady development's worth noting, and while I will admit that I'm not necessarily gung-ho and excited about what's to come, at the same time, I'm not at the point where I feel like the cleaning lady is starting to lose its luster and it's something that I would want to drop. Even though, to be very honest, in the back of my head, I do wonder, is this going to see a third season? Because it's not presenting the type of stuff you would think would trigger Fox to create a third season, a fourth season, and really allow the creators to know that we have time to keep at this pace rather than having to speed things up.